The purpose of this module is to review training materials for the kindergarten writing tasks of the New York State English as a Second Language Achievement Test, NYSESLAT. In this presentation, I will review the writing rubrics and discuss writing responses illustrating each score point for each of the 4 types of kindergarten writing tasks. I will walk through the Turnkey Training PowerPoint, which you have access to in the electronic materials on the Office of State Assessment's website. There, you will also be able to access the Turnkey Training Binder materials. Additional practice responses, along with scores and justifications, can be found in the Turnkey materials. You may want to follow along during this presentation with a printed copy of the Turnkey materials, but it is not necessary to do so. As a reminder, the Turnkey materials are designed to supplement the writing scoring guide that is updated each year. The writing scoring guide includes student responses, scores, and justifications based on items currently on the test. The materials in this training are not currently on the NYSESLAT test and can be used to introduce examiners to the design of the writing section and to provide general training about how the responses are scored. Examiners should always review the writing scoring guide before administering the test each year. Kindergarten writing has 4 types of tasks, each with its own rubric. Letter writing is scored with a 0 to 1 point rubric. Word writing is scored with a 0 to 2 point rubric. Sentence writing is scored with a 0 to 2 point rubric. The Write a Story Short constructed response is scored with a 0 to 4 point rubric. The writing rubrics are holistic rubrics. This means that a student response will receive 1 score based on all the dimensions of the rubric you are using. In holistic scoring, it is crucial that scorers put aside their own beliefs, ideas, and theories about how to evaluate students' work. For any large-scale scoring project to be successful and have meaningful results, all scorers must score according to the criteria established by the rubrics. Score each response on its own merit. A mediocre response may appear great if it's read after a weak response. Use the evidence presented in the response against the rubric. Don't compare prior responses with the one you are currently scoring. It is important to be familiar with the rubric for the particular grade band you are scoring. Also become familiar with the passage and prompt, so that you are able to recognize text in the response that is copied from the passage or prompt. Evaluate the response for total overall performance based on the criteria delineated in the rubric. Match the evidence from the response to the language of the rubric. Look for what is included in the response, not what is missing. Keep in mind that the highest score point on the rubric scale does not measure a perfect response. When you are scoring responses, you will see a range of responses for each rubric score point, including the highest or 4 score point. On the written tests, handwriting does not count in scoring. Let's look at the kindergarten letter writing rubric and prompt. This is on page 130 of the Turnkey materials. The dimensions for kindergarten letter writing are letter forming and legibility. According to the letter writing rubric, a student response will get a 0 if the response is blank, is not a recognizable letter, is an incorrect letter, is upside down, or is illegible or unintelligible. A student response will get a score of 1 if the response is recognizable as the correct letter. It is acceptable if it is sloppy, is upper or lower case, is cursive, or is backward if the reversal does not change it into a different letter. It is acceptable if the response includes other letters before and or after the correct letter. The prompt is, now you will write a letter. On the line, write the letter Y, as in the word yes. Sample 1 has a score of 1. It is recognizable as the correct letter Y. It is acceptable that it is an uppercase letter. Sample 2 also has a score of 1. It is recognizable as the correct letter Y, and it is acceptable that it is lowercase. Sample 3 has a score of 1. The response is recognizable as the correct letter. It is acceptable that there are other letters before or after the correct letter, in this case, another letter Y. Sample 4 is a score of 1. The correct letter Y is recognizable. It is acceptable that there are other letters, W and I, before the correct letter. Sample 5 is scored a 0. The response is incorrect letters. The student wrote W-U-E instead of the letter Y. Sample 6 is scored a 0. The response is an incorrect letter. The student wrote the letter T instead of the letter Y. Sample 7 is a 0. The response is an incorrect letter. The student wrote the letter W instead of the letter Y. Sample 8 is scored a 0. The response is not a recognizable letter. Now let's look at the kindergarten word writing rubric. It is on page 137 of the Turnkey materials. The dimensions for word writing are letter forming and accuracy. A response will get a score of 0 if it does not sequence letters needed to produce a recognizable correct word, is blank, is in a language other than English, is illegible or unintelligible, is spelled incorrectly without phonemic awareness, or includes an upside-down letter or letters. A response will get a score of 1 if it sequences most of the letters needed to produce the recognizable correct word and demonstrates phonemic awareness by using grade appropriate spelling, phonetic or inventive spelling. It is acceptable if it includes legible letters, includes letters that may be uppercase, lowercase, or both, is cursive, or includes backward letters. A response is eligible for a score of 2 if it sequences all letters needed to produce the correct word. It is acceptable if it includes legible letters, has no spelling errors, includes letters that may be uppercase, lowercase, or both, is cursive, or includes backward letters so long as the reversal does not change them into different letters. The prompt is, this is a picture of a cat. On the line, write the word cat. Sample 1 is scored a 2. This response sequences all letters needed to produce the correct word. The response includes the backward letter C, but the reversal does not change it into a different letter. Sample 2 is scored a 1. The response sequences most of the letters needed to produce the recognizable correct word. It contains the correct initial and terminal phonemes and letters with an incorrect vowel. The response demonstrates phonemic awareness by using grade-appropriate spelling. Sample 3 is scored a 1. The response sequences most of the letters needed to produce the recognizable correct word. The response contains the correct initial phoneme, but not the correct initial letter C. The response demonstrates phonemic awareness by using grade-appropriate spelling. The response includes letters that may be both uppercase and lowercase. Sample 4 is scored a 1. The response sequences most of the letters needed to produce the recognizable correct word. The response contains the correct initial and terminal phonemes and letters with the missing middle phoneme and letter. The response demonstrates phonemic awareness by using grade-appropriate spelling. Sample 5 is scored a 0. The response does not sequence the letters needed to produce the recognizable correct word. While the student demonstrates some phonemic awareness of the initial and terminal phonemes, the response does not produce and sequence most of the correct letters in the correct order. The only correct letter is the T. Sample 6 is scored a 0. The response does not sequence the letters needed to produce the recognizable correct word. The response is spelled incorrectly. The only correctly sequenced letter is the C. Now let's look at the rubric for kindergarten sentence writing. It is on page 143 of the Turnkey materials. The dimensions are letter forming, words, and accuracy. A response will get a score of 0 if it does not differentiate letters and words, includes few or no words, is blank, is completely in a language other than English, is completely illegible or unintelligible, is irrelevant, or is a single word. A response will get a score of 1 if it includes most of the words in the correct order. It is acceptable if it does not have an initial capital letter, includes erratic word spacing, includes some incorrect spelling that is not phonetic or inventive, includes several backward letters if the reversal does not change it into a different letter, or does not include appropriate end punctuation. A response is eligible for a score of 2 if it includes all words in the correct order. It is acceptable if it does not have an initial capital letter, maintains appropriate spacing, includes grade appropriate spelling, phonetic or inventive spelling, includes a few backward letters if the reversal does not change it into a different letter, or does not include appropriate end punctuation. The prompt is, now you will write a sentence, we will play. On the lines, write the sentence, we will play. We will play. Sample 1 is scored a 2. The response includes all words in the correct order. It is acceptable for a score of 2 that the response includes grade appropriate spelling, phonetic or inventive, which in this case are the words will, spelled W-I-L, and play, spelled P-L-A-E. It is acceptable that the response does not include appropriate end punctuation. Sample 2 is scored a 2. The response contains all words in the correct order. It is acceptable for a score of 2 that the response does not have an initial capital letter. It is acceptable that it includes grade appropriate spelling, phonetic or inventive, which in this case is the word play, spelled P-L-E-Y. It is acceptable that the response does not include appropriate end punctuation. Sample 3 is scored a 2. The response includes all words in the correct order. It is acceptable that the sentence is written twice. Sample 4 is scored a 1. The response includes most of the words in the correct order. The first and last words are in the correct order. It is acceptable for a score of 1 that the response does not include an initial capital letter or end punctuation. Sample 5 is scored a 1. The response includes most of the words in the correct order. The first and last words are in the correct order. It is acceptable for a score of 1 that the response does not include an initial capital letter. It is acceptable that the response includes some incorrect spelling that is not phonetic or inventive. Sample 6 is scored a 1. The response includes most of the words in the correct order. The first and second words are in the correct order. It is acceptable for a score of 1 that the response does not have an initial capital letter. It is acceptable for a score of 1 that the response includes some incorrect spelling that is not phonetic or inventive. The letter reversal of the letter P turns it into a Q, which is not a phonetic or inventive spelling of the word play. It is acceptable that the response does not include end punctuation. Sample 7 is scored a 1. The response includes most of the words in the correct order. It is acceptable for a score of 1 that the response includes some incorrect spelling that is not phonetic or inventive. The spelling W-I-O-L is not a phonetic or inventive spelling of the word will. It is acceptable that the response does not include end punctuation. Sample 8 is scored a 0. The response is irrelevant. It is a single incorrect word. Now let's review the kindergarten short constructed response Write a Story rubric. Be sure to have a kindergarten SCR rubric in front of you. The rubric is on page 149 of the Turnkey materials. The 3 dimensions of the rubric are in the first column. Complexity of language and quality of language are combined. The other 2 dimensions are coherence of response and mechanics. Across the top of the rubric, you see the 5 performance levels, from entering through commanding. The information in the individual cells below explains how each dimension is described in terms of these performance levels. Even though there are 3 dimensions on the rubric, only 1 score is assigned to each student response. There is a note at the bottom of the rubric to remind you that if a response is irrelevant to the prompt, the highest score it can receive is a 1. There will be a few examples of this in the training. The language in the rubrics is grounded in the writing targets of measurement and the writing performance level descriptions. Let's review the 3 dimensions of the rubric. The first is complexity quality of language. This refers to the forms of language used by the student, the words, phrases, and sentence structures. For example, a simple sentence contains primarily a subject and a verb. For example, the dog is barking. An expanded sentence contains a simple sentence, but with a phrase tacked on somewhere, often at the end. For example, the dog is barking in the yard. A compound sentence is often made up of two simple sentences joined by and or but. For example, the dog is barking and it is making noise. A complex sentence includes more than one subject-verb structure. These are frequently connected by because, when, who, or if. For example, the dog is barking because he sees a squirrel. The next dimension is coherence of response, which evaluates the sufficiency of descriptions. It allows students to draw and or write their response. The mechanics dimension evaluates clarity of meaning and the degree to which errors in spelling, capitalization, punctuation, and grammar obscure meaning. Let's look more closely at each dimension, starting with complexity quality of language. Note the progression of sentence structure requirements across the performance levels of this dimension. A response at the emerging level will have words, short phrases, or predictable sentences. A response at the transitioning level will contain phrases and simple sentences. A response at the expanding level will contain simple and or expanded sentences. A response at the commanding level will contain simple and or expanded sentences and one or more compound or complex sentences. The coherence of response dimension evaluates the sufficiency of descriptions and allows students to draw and or write descriptions of events when writing a story or about a topic. Let's look at the emerging column. There are three ways for a response to be emerging in the coherence of response dimension. 1. The response includes only drawings to minimally provide descriptions. 2. The response includes words and phrases and a drawing to minimally provide descriptions. 3. The response includes only words and phrases to minimally provide descriptions. If a student response contains only drawings to minimally provide a description, the response receives a holistic score of 1 regardless of the other dimensions. At the transitioning level, a response that includes only a very detailed drawing to somewhat provide descriptions will receive a holistic score of 2. However, that is very rare. More common are responses that include phrases, sentences, and drawings that somewhat provide descriptions, or a response that contains only phrases and sentences that somewhat provide descriptions. At the expanding and commanding levels, while the response may or may not have a drawing, the score is based on the string of phrases and sentences. An expanding response somewhat provides a description, and a commanding response provides a description. The mechanics dimension evaluates clarity of meaning and the degree to which errors in spelling, capitalization, punctuation, and grammar obscure meaning. This dimension is the same at all grade bands. The kindergarten SCR passage is called Sam the Zookeeper. Please follow along on page 150 of the Turnkey materials as you listen to Sam the Zookeeper and the prompt that follows. Directions. I will read a story called Sam the Zookeeper. Then you will draw and write about the story. Sam works at the zoo. He takes care of the birds. Sam spends a lot of time at the zoo. First, he makes food for the birds. Then he feeds them. Some birds eat during the day. Others eat at night. The birds also need to have fresh water to bathe in and drink. Last, Sam makes sure they are healthy and safe. Caring for the birds makes him happy. This story is about the birds at a zoo. Some people have birds as pets. Which animal do you think is a good pet? I will give you time to draw a picture about the animal you think is a good pet. Then I will ask you to write about the animal you think is a good pet. You will be able to go back and work on your drawing when you are finished writing. After giving the students time to draw, the examiner reads, "Now look at the lines below the box. Use these lines for your writing. Write about the animal you think is a good pet. Write why you think that animal is a good pet." Sample 1 is scored a 4, commanding. Typical sentence markers like a capital letter at the beginning of a sentence and a period at the end of a sentence are sometimes absent or misplaced. However, as long as the response has sentence structures and the missing or misplaced punctuation doesn't interfere with meaning, you can consider the text as sentences and score it accordingly for complexity of language. This response is at the commanding level in all three dimensions. For complexity quality of language, this response has a complex sentence. I think a big dog is a good pet because big dog can run very fast. It also contains a simple sentence. They had sharp teeth. For coherence of response, the response includes a drawing and a string of phrases and sentences to provide descriptions. The descriptions include big dog, run very fast, and sharp teeth. The response is clear with minimal errors that obscure meaning. Sample 2 is scored a 3, expanding. Complexity quality of language for this response is at the commanding level. The response contains a complex sentence. I like a bird because a bird can fly. Coherence of response is at the transitioning level. The response contains a drawing and a sentence to somewhat provide descriptions. The description here is can fly. Mechanics is at the expanding level. The response is clear and contains few errors that rarely obscure meaning. Sample 3 is scored a 2, transitioning. The response contains a simple sentence, my dog can jump. Responses that contain simple sentences are transitioning in complexity quality of language. Coherence of response is at the transitioning level. The response includes a drawing and a sentence to somewhat provide descriptions and events. The description here is, can jump. Mechanics is at the transitioning level. The response is mostly clear, but contains errors that occasionally obscure meaning, like misspelling jump and dog in such a brief response. Sample 4 is scored a 1, emerging. Complexity quality of language and mechanics are at the entering level. The written text is unintelligible. However, the response includes a drawing of a bird to minimally provide descriptions. If a response contains no text or incomprehensible text, but includes a drawing related to the prompt, the response will be scored a holistic 1. It can even be scored a holistic 2 on the rare occasion that a drawing is very detailed. Sample 5 is scored a 1, emerging. This response contains words and a short phrase, is a dog. This is at the emerging level for complexity quality of language. A response would need at least a simple sentence to be at the transitioning level. It is okay that this response does not include a drawing. A response without a drawing can receive a commanding score in coherence of response because descriptions can be included in either the writing or the drawing. However, the words and phrases in this response only minimally provide descriptions. The description here is dog. The response is at the emerging level for coherence of response. Mechanics is at the emerging level. The brief response contains many errors that often obscure meaning. Sample 6 is scored a 0, entering. The response contains 0 words or short phrases. The drawing is not recognizable as being related to the prompt. Kindergarten writing practice items can be found in the Turnkey materials. You can go through these practice items at your own pace, and these provide an opportunity to practice applying the writing rubrics to additional responses for the 4 types of kindergarten writing tasks. Practice items for letter writing are on page 133 of the Turnkey materials. Practice items for word writing are on page 139. Practice items for sentence writing are on page 145. Practice items for the Write a Story SCR start on page 161. The Turnkey materials also contain the scores and justifications for the practice responses. For questions regarding testing policies, accommodations, security breaches, and sensitive student responses, contact the Office of State Assessment. For questions regarding providing ELL and MLL services in bilingual education and English as a new language programs, contact the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages in Albany or the New York City office. For questions regarding scoring of speaking and writing constructed response questions or shipment of materials, contact Metrotech Inc. Customer Service. For regulatory or training assistance, contact the Regional Bilingual Education Resource Networks using the link shown here. For information about machine scannable answer sheets and local scanning services, contact your RIC or large city scanning center using the link shown here. For information about NYSESLAT and regular updates, including the Turnkey training materials and School Administrator's Manual, SAM, go to the NYSESLAT homepage at the link shown here. Thank you for your work to ensure that the writing section of the NYSESLAT is scored reliably and accurately.